It is 6:30. I'm sorry, it's 5:30. It's been a day. I'll call the meeting to order. Up first is the floodplain ordinance review. Jane, welcome.
Thank you. So this is a pretty, I don't know how much in depth you want me to go into, but it actually ends up being a pretty simple amendment after a lot of hand wringing, I think. But the city is part of what's called the CRS program, which is a community rating system program. And for those of you who may not be aware of this, it's basically a voluntary program, and it's provided as an incentive because communities who are part of this program, residents get basically a discounted flood insurance rate where needed. It's not that difficult a program to be a part of. There's a checklist of items you need to meet, and like anything, depending on your level of commitment, that's kind of corresponds to the level of incentive or discount. But for the most part, what you need to do is have some regulations that are more restrictive than just the standard National Flood Insurance Program regulations or the FEMA requirements. So for the most part, the city has complied with that, and about every 5 years or so, the city will undergo an audit of floodplain regulations to ensure that you're compliant with whatever current floodplain requirements are in place. And that happened in July of 2021. And the only thing that was found at the time, that there is a provision in the city code that did not really require that you elevate mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and HVAC equipment up to the 1 foot above the flood elevation or the RFPE. So essentially, every new house that you build in the floodplain has to be elevated 1 foot above the regional flood elevation. And that's where they often call that a foot of freeboard, which I think is confusing, but that's what it is. So the Carver ordinance has that, but the provision about electrical, the HVAC, mechanical equipment, does not include that. So the change is really rather simple. It just goes to, most of it's in section 21-24B4, and it's just clarifying the language to ensure that all mechanical and electrical equipment is elevated at least up to the regulatory flood protection elevation, which is that 1 foot above the regional flood elevation. Anything below that needs to be constructed so water is prevented from entering. And what would generally be below that would be service lines, utility lines, the things that come into the house. So that is it. With the adoption of this language, the city complies with all of the CRS requirements and will continue to maintain that discounted flood insurance rate. This has been reviewed by the DNR and the CRS staff and the city attorney, so it's pretty good to go if you're interested.
Any questions?
I have a quick question, Jane. So for residents to get that discount, do they have to use certain home insurance providers, or they can?
As I understand it, it's just sort of an automatic. So any home insurance provider will work through a list of companies that provide flood insurance, and it's just applied. It's sort of, I kind of think of it like auto discounts. Non-smokers, 55 plus. It just sort of, you might need to check a box off where you live, and it'll go through that. So they don't have to make an application for that discount.
Interesting. So if you are building something newish, or you're remodeling, or it's a substantial improvements, so if you can't have it, the freeboard line, so then does that mean people have to put them like on their first floors in their house?
Yeah, I've seen them elevated in basements. Where you've seen, they'll actually just kind of, it's like a furnace. They'll put it up above that elevation. I mean, sometimes you'll go in places and you see there's an electrical outlet like way up on top of the wall, and that's usually to accommodate that foot
Royce did a Instagram video, kind of tour of their new place, and I think the Getaway Motor Cafe, I think they're complying with this, so they showed like a shelf where he was like, that's where our furnace is gonna go,
Yeah.
that's where they are exchanging.
Yeah, my old brick house was
Okay.
up, and it was before, obviously, printed this, but it was already up on one because there was water that came in that basement, so I just didn't know if that was meant like, you might have to put it on the first floor then.
I think it would depend on the house
Yeah.
where you're at, but it doesn't necessarily have to go on the first floor. If you can fit it in the basement, it'll work. You know, I've seen big attics. So,
My question is just, is there anything in this language that is substantially changing what residents have already been doing?
I would say no. You know.
That's kind of how I read it, but I
Yeah.
want to make sure,
No,
right?
it's
That we're not
more-
gonna put any additional, throw any craziness in anything anybody's got planned or something.
Yeah, the scope is really narrow. I mean,
Yeah.
the mayor mentioned like the Getaway Motor Cafe, that's
Yeah.
a total, that's what I would call that new construction or substantial improvements.
sure.
But if Councilmember Mott's furnace goes out, you'd still be able to replace it where it's at.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are provisions for
Okay.
retrofitting structures, and really it's new or substantial additions or expansions, and then you need to work. But you know, that's part of how you work around and make sure you're doing things properly.
Okay.
For your average resident or average home, I would
It's not
think
gonna
they
be-
would notice it
Okay.
at all.
The only question that I have is it said that this is part of the flood insurance program.
Mm-hmm.
I assume does this requirement go away if and when we were to ever have a certified levy?
If you've been on the river, so you're more than likely in the communities that I've worked with, your floodplain doesn't completely go away, but it gets limited.
Okay.
So this applies only to properties that are within the floodplain. So if your floodplain were narrowed or eliminated, for some cases, then yes, the requirement would go away.
Okay.
And it, it would be, where you feel the impact is new construction or remodeling, but anything that's out existing, we're not, you're just gonna leave it the way it is.
Okay. Any additional questions? I don't have any issues with this. This seems to make sense. Anything we can do to save our folks some money on flood insurance, I'm all in favor of.
So I think the schedule is we have it as a public hearing at the planning commission on August 18th, and it'll be in front of you on September 6th.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Do you need anything else from us?
No, do you
No.
need, do you need anything else from me?
No, we're good. Thank you,
I
Jen.
would add, in talking with Aaron Schmidt, he has said there's some other potential changes that working with the watershed district they're talking about, but I guess those get a little more complicated, so he didn't, rather than pick those up here,
The CRS folks, we asked for an extension just because we've had kind of, with Aaron Smith out, we asked for an extension on their deadline, but they want this adopted by September 6th, or they're gonna consider downgrading our rating, so
Let's get that.
so we're expediting this, and then we'll come back with any changes that we need from Lower Minnesota watershed changes, et cetera, so.
Okay.
So you will see floodplain again, I didn't think you had that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too. Okay, item number 3, speed limits on local roads overviews. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this is an extension of a request from some residents at a previous meeting regarding the concept to reduce speed limits in the city. Councilmember Mock asked for some follow-up, and then we confirmed that at a work session a couple meetings ago. So somewhat of a change if you're not kind of following local speed limits on city streets, but for quite a few years, cities really had no authority to change or regulate speed limits in their city, especially on local roads. And as you can see here, in 2019, that changed, where cities could consider adopting 25 mile per hour speed limits or as you'll see kind of later, you can do lower speed limits, but they require an engineering study that gets at that speed limit and looks at the road. So there's some kind of degrees of where you can go, but the main point here is you have some flexibility where you once did not. And then before we kind of get into the feedback, just wanted to kind of do kind of a mapping of, well, that's almost a pun there, right? A mapping of roads. So our local collector roads, and some of these are somewhat hybrid. I mean, you can look at collectors in different ways. Traditionally, they don't have driveways. We do have some where we have driveways on one side. Some, for Spring Creek Drive, for example, you have driveways on two sides, at least in a section of it. Mount Hope Road, you have limited driveways. So, but essentially, these are kind of the roads that get you to places where our local neighborhood roads. We can all think of examples, are kind of everything else besides our county and state roads, which are Jonathan Carver Parkway, County Road 40 and Main Street, and then obviously 212. So some examples of cities with speed limits below 30 miles per hour. There surely is probably more. These were the ones that we could find in and around the area, ranging from some local folks in Victoria all the way to our core urban cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. You see one in greater Minnesota with the city of Rochester, but largely metro area piece right now. Doing a peer city review, you see that we mentioned Victoria. None of our other peer cities, at least that responded, right now are below 30 miles per hour on their local roads. Some data related to pedestrian safety. Got this from the city of Falcon Heights' website, but probably not surprising, but the lower the speeds, the safer it is for pedestrians, the higher the speeds. The likelihood of severe injury or dying increases. So I think, in essence, when we were talking to Victoria and Edina specifically, we got that sense that pedestrian safety was a major driver in their decision-making process. That said, MnDOT has a web page kind of related to speeds, and take this for what it's worth, but what they have found is that the lower speeds don't necessarily lower speed limits don't necessarily lower speeds of drivers. Speeds are essentially related to the conditions on that street, so what the driver sees, whether it's whether a car is parked, the orientation of the road, curvature, etc. So you'll see some of that narrative come out in some of the responses that we see from our other cities. And I won't kind of read this word for word, but essentially you can see some of the impetuses for change here with the city of Victoria, that they had several speeding complaints in the city, and they looked at a wide range of options. They ended up taking action in 2019 and spent about $10,000 to replace their signs. Now, I think one of the critical pieces, if the council elects to move forward, is in Victoria's case and Edina's case, and if you look at some of the other cities that are around there, they did a really good job of kind of blasting out the message. Some dedicated specific websites on the speed limit is changing and why they're doing it, and providing that notice. As far as kind of anecdotally or measuring driving habits, not a huge amount of data related to that. So I would encourage you to take that information kind of and apply it to how you're thinking about this topic. And then finally, just wanted to understand if there is kind of a next step where you end up lowering the speed limits, and you're not seeing the result of that increase requests for law enforcement. And at least in Victoria's case, there was not any additional requests. And then just kind of a comparison, Edina was actually, in talking to one of their council members, was kind of one of the motivating groups in getting the legislation changed at a state level. So they were, I would say, at the forefront of this movement. And then if you look at kind of following suit with their neighboring city, Minneapolis. Edina's kind of in the process of kind of gathering, what the impact is. But I think we kind of saw some of this as far as it related to our study on Spring Creek Drive, or not Spring Creek Drive, on Green Ash Drive, where they were finding people driving slower than 30, and I think you find that here in Edina, at least based on their analysis, that people are driving a lower speed, but you can often find that when people are driving 30 or in excess of 30, it'll feel really fast and unsafe at times in a neighborhood in a condensed setting like that. And then again, was there a request for additional speed enforcement? And Edina took an additional step saying that they didn't want to dedicate any additional resources to kind of enforcement of their new speed limit changes. Then in your packet, kind of an immense amount of information related to the reports that these cities have done, Edina, St. Louis Park, and Victoria. When you can, and part of this is when you consider speeds lower than 25, you really have to do that engineering study and look at the dynamics of each road, how it's constructed, the curvatures, etc. widths. So it really makes that more of a kind of a complex issue. 25 is, there's still some complexities in it, but definitely more streamlined if that's the approach that you wanted to take. And then this kind of, there can obviously be some more options here, but we thought that these were kind of the most self-evident. Considering looking at a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, doing that comprehensive study. I think if you wanted to get into either one or two, we should, probably have another work session and invite Dan Lanis and probably Chad to, contribute to the conversation on that as well as probably our friends from the sheriff's office. 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. Engineering study isn't required. We'd still want to do some level of analysis from the city council to kind of get at, is this all local roads? Is it, are you going to exclude collectors, that kind of thing? And then expecting to spend anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 on some type of combined effort with signage and just kind of process-oriented pieces. Number 3 is kind of including this as a next step, is just looking at it as a part of our next community survey that is in 2024. As you know, we did get feedback from residents at that council meeting about a month or month and a half ago. We haven't received any additional emails, phone calls, website inquiries about this topic. So I think we're, at least from my point of view, we're a little bit in the dark on how the community feels about this as a whole. I know there was a private survey on a local Facebook group site. We don't have, or I don't have access to that data. Not sure who participates in that from are they a city resident, are they a community resident, etc. And then finally, you can obviously opt to take no action at this time and just say this isn't a topic that you're interested in pursuing at this time. So with that, be happy to entertain any questions.
I'm happy to go first on this one. I think from a policy standpoint, I'm not against lowering the speed limit, but I'm struggling with what we're solving for here. We did kind of a speed study, if you will, on a section of Green Ash Drive, and nobody, I think I still have it up, nobody went over like 26 miles an hour. That's not speeding, and that's still, within kind of the limits of a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I guess I'm just struggling with this, and my vote's more to go with option number 4 of taking no action. I'm not against including it in a community survey in a couple of years, but I think that's too far down the road at this point to say that we're going to be doing that for sure. Let's see. I just jotted down some notes. I think there are other tactics that we can use too. I know other communities have speed trailers. I think that it just concerns me, kind of like to what you said. We've heard from 3 people out of 6,000 on this. So that is not a representative sample of our community, so, that's kind of where I'm. Oh, the only other thing is, these neighborhoods that have the speeding concerns, I think you and I have talked about this anecdotally. I probably drive around Carver more often than most people do, but I would venture to guess that it's not you, Christy Mock, who's speeding on Spring Creek Drive, or you're not speeding on Kirchy Hill Drive, like everybody kind of stays within their orbit. These are your neighbors who are speeding. These are your neighbors' guests. So maybe build community, talk to them. I think that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and maybe that's the wrong analogy to use, but it just seems like a bigger fix isn't needed at this time.
Yeah, I mean, what struck me about this information, which was extremely helpful, thank you for staff for putting this together, was very insightful, but the cities of Victoria and Edina said, we didn't really have people speeding, based upon the data we pulled prior. We had complaints, right? But we went and did this. We're not sure it had any change, right? Because we didn't see an issue beforehand, but it certainly made everybody feel better. And I also agree with you. At this point in time, the city of Carver doesn't have a lot of what I would call local residential roads that are collectors or throughways to other areas of the community. They're for that neighborhood, right? You don't go on Carver Bluffs Parkway to go anywhere else but Carver Bluffs, right? And so, right, you're not going through that, as opposed to like the city of Edina, their map, those were through places, right? Those roads were through residential areas to get to somewhere else. They were very connected. That's a little different of a story than I think that we face here in Carver. So I'm kind of leaning with you that this was great information and very helpful to kind of understand what the state has done, what other communities have done. But I'm not necessarily seeing that we have a whole bunch of community members who are really interested in this. And also I'm happy to consider it for next survey. So I'm with you on number 4, maybe number 3 in the future.
Kristen?
Either, okay. So when I'm thinking about the 25 to 30, so our collectors, or what we consider collectors, our minimum driveway roads, I wouldn't want to see them less than 30 miles an hour, where they're at now. The 25, when we were looking at with our speed study that we did, they weren't being clocked at 30, and they did it multiple places, multiple times.
Unmarked.
Yeah, and unmarked too. So we weren't seeing this huge amount. I mean, people are 10 miles an hour over and 15 miles an hour. Not that doesn't happen, because if you're going to be that kind of person, you're going to be that kind of person anyways, right? Then you're not going to care what the speed limit sign says in front of you. I was just losing my train of thought here. Sorry, give me 1 second.
The data was showing that nobody was really.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry. So there's a lot of things. So, and then we were looking at I know that the informal survey that someone put on Facebook. Well, I found it interesting. I don't think that is large enough to call it a sample of what the rest of the community thinks. Not that it isn't, it's nice that someone did that and they wanted to see what people thought, but I think that I would be more in favor of having having it as a question in our community-wide survey to see later on if the rest of the community, because if you're not on that Facebook page, or maybe you didn't see it that day, or maybe you don't care, or maybe
Or if you live in Waconia and want to open.
right, or you live in Carver Highlands, south of town. You're not technically even a city resident, but you chimed in on it. So to me, while I thought it was nice that it happened, I don't think it really represents all of our community. So when we're looking at some of these speed limits and different things, we did this in the downtown. There's traffic calming measures that you can use. So maybe this is something where we look at some of our new developments, we're looking at bump outs where the sidewalks, so that pedestrians are spending less time in the lanes of traffic when they're crossing the street. I don't have all of the traffic calming measures in my head, but I know that that's a big one, because when we designed the downtown streets, we added bump outs.
Also making like
purposely.
curved roads instead of just pure grids,
Right.
right? When it's a curve, people slow down.
Yeah, so I think that maybe there's some opportunities to look at what traffic calming might look like in some of our neighborhoods, rather than going for the speed limit change right away. Well, like I said, I'm not opposed to a 25 mile an hour. I just think that I'm not seeing yet the cause and effect of this. Because we didn't in that sample study see this going over. I know that and I'm glad you said that, Courtney, about kind of our own little bubbles of neighborhoods. I know when I leave my house, I know who my neighbors are, and I'm not, hammering down the road right in front of my house because there's people and there's other cars and I'm trying to pay attention. So for me, I think number 3, but along with when we start looking at our developments, that maybe we have a bigger conversation when we're looking at these coming in, how we can do some traffic calming measures in that way. That's what I have for now.
I'm very similar, 3 and 4. I don't see from a policy perspective, implementing something. I think it was a really good presentation. I like that it included dollar amounts for estimates, and then to the cities that are doing something, kind of the why. And then 2, I like already thinking of things for the community survey, so I think somebody's keeping track of that. So that's a yes? Okay,
Yep.
Great. And the thing is, what I have a hard time with it is just that inconsistency. And yes, it wouldn't be on collector roads, but like, okay, which road 25, which neighborhood, which one's 30? Like, I have a hard time with the consistency. And then if it was something we're gonna do, like maybe you just pilot or you try a few. For me personally, I don't know if Green Ash Drive would be on my list, because the planning commission, the city, we're doing a great job with the pedestrian safety and having the sidewalks. Because there's a sidewalk there, that might not be a high priority one for me if we ever went that direction, so.
I think whatever we do, we have to do it consistently. I don't
Yes.
think that, when my dad comes to visit town, that he would be able to remember, oh, wait, I'm on a collector street, so I need to go 30,
I know, and I'm
know that
driving
we have
around with a
handy-dandy
15-year-old with her permit, and how many times says, what's the speed limit? And I'm like, well, I'm waiting to get to the next sign.
Yeah.
So it's,
I know we have handy dandy
Yeah.
signs around, but I just don't, I
Yeah.
think it needs to be consistent.
I like, I like consistency.
I like your idea about, keeping this in mind for development, and maybe we design more 25-mile-an-hour roads. I think the topography of Carver helps us tremendously with that, because I'm
Right, that is
thinking
true.
of like Brookview. You're not gonna be able to go 30 in there. I'll argue you can't go 30 on Green Ash Drive because of the 90-degree curve, the stop sign, and then the cul-de-sac. I think even, what did we approve last time, the preserve, there too, that's gonna be another one that would be a struggle because of, again, just, the way that that's laid out, that's a horseshoe, and it's gonna be real hard to go pretty fast there. I liked what you said about if you're gonna be that kind of person, you're gonna be that kind of person. It's kind of the same scenario as when we put in the pet waste stations, right? Like, a lower speed limit isn't gonna make you a better person, a pet waste station isn't gonna make you a better person. There's only so much we can do here, and this is more of a community effort of getting to know your neighbors, talking to them in a reasonable manner, not here, and I just drive slower.
Right, and I really think it might be a question in the next community survey, and then we get a broader spectrum of all of Carver.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yeah.
that's what, I would need that in order to feel comfortable going with 25, because there's people on both sides of that coin, right? So I'd like to hear from
Everyone.
broader.
And I think I want to be careful, I don't want to get too far ahead of us in crafting a question, but I think we need to be careful about crafting the question. Do you want a lower speed limit? Sure.
Right.
Right. Do you want a lower speed limit, knowing that it's going to cost taxpayers $15,000
Right.
or whatever
Whatever
that number is? So, I just want to keep that in mind too. So, how about if we, as they say in the corporate world, put a pin in this until we get around to planning for the 2024 community survey,
Agreed.
and then we can revisit.
Along with some of those traffic calming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Things that we could talk about during development plans.
Is that clear enough direction? Okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you again for all
yeah.
the detailed information.
Yes,
It was
this
very
is
helpful.
really helpful. This is exactly what I was hoping to see.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, moving on to the employee survey review, Mr. Mark.
So let me
Yep.
pull it up here. So as you may recall, as a part of our, or as part of the city council strategic plan, one of the initiatives was to do an employee survey, both full-time and part-time employees, to get a sense of how we were doing. The council previously looked at kind of 2 draft surveys, made some modifications to the questions. And then earlier this year, the survey was presented in 2 forms, one to full-time employees and the one to essentially part-time, or which would be the fire department. Used a web-based survey tool, SurveyMonkey. Responses were provided were anonymous from the employees, and then a kind of a follow-up, kind of breakout session where each department had met with their teams and had a facilitated conversation about what the results meant to them and ideas for a proposed action plan. So based on that action plan, or based on that feedback, we created a proposed action plan. So I'm just going to walk through what that means. So number 1, consider conducting a compensation study for full-time employees as a part of the 2024 budget process. So probably not something that this council is super familiar with, but back in 2013, the city did a comprehensive compensation study. So it looked at every position description. We developed the peer cities at that time. But as far as cost, a compensation study is probably around $20,000 to $25,000 to have done. So it's no small feat. So in 2019, we did a kind of an abbreviated study. Frankly, because I think we felt we were in pretty good position. We hadn't done a compensation study, at least to my knowledge, in the city, and so we had at the time really no developed step or grade system. We had, I think, a 5-step program, but it wasn't kind of graded out, and so we ended up developing, I think it was like 11 steps in the first go around, and then in 2019 we moved to, I think, 20 steps. And then you might recall that we got away from the step system and moved to an open range pay system, which establishes a minimum and a maximum. But essentially what this would do is make sure that you're in line with your peer cities, not only by kind of overall, but by position. And you're given a series of options to consider once you have that compensation study. And so at a minimum, I think it provides the city council with an opportunity to kind of check in and say how we're doing. I think what's scary when I think back to 2013 is you're put in a position where, in order to kind of catch up, you're taking a huge step. And in 2013, we happened to be in a position where we had 3 positions that were out of balance with our pay equity requirements. And so it ended up being a significant financial investment, more so than if you kept on top of it, on a semi-regular basis. You could at least manage your progress. And so we're probably due for that anyway, but I think in light of the employee comments, it kind of shows that we're as interested in their feedback as they're interested in that topic. Number 2, create an employee engagement committee. So looking at ways to recognize and engage with employees, creating that committee so it's just not a top-down, hey, this is how we're going to be recognized, or this is how we're going to have fun, to kind of generate that from within. 2, trying to really enhance and prioritize, kind of strengthen our internal communications. I think we've done a great job in kind of focusing and kind of reinventing our external communications with residents. But when I think just based on the speed and the volume of communications that we have, I think it's probably a blind spot and real easy to overlook. Like, hey, we need to tell the people in the office what's going on just as much as we need to tell the people on 6th Street what's going on. So looking at that, and then kind of an add-on to that is conducting all staff meetings to promote information sharing, team building. 5, we wanted to kind of clarify the nomination and selection process for the Employee of the Year award. That award has been in place for several years now, and I think we probably could do a better job of kind of not only communicating what that is, but kind of refreshing the program so everyone understands what we're recognizing.
Brent, for that one, was that based on feedback? Did folks not feel like they knew what it was about?
I think there was a, based on the feedback that I got, that there was a sentiment that maybe not understanding the criteria of what the award was, that it was maybe arbitrarily given to an employee based on who likes them.
Okay.
And so it's just for your kind of give some feedback on that. It's nominated, so you have to be nominated by a peer based on your ability to kind of uphold the staff values. And I think over time, it's maybe inadvertently folks have maybe thought of it as like, well, I've maybe been here longer. Why is this newer person getting it? And so I think we just need to have a conversation about what we're recognizing. And when I say we, I mean like our team. Like, it's not just when I'm in the room or Lynn's in the room or Brenda's in the room. It's every interaction you have is a representation of how you're upholding the values of our team. So I just think it's good, and it's an opportunity to respond to feedback directly on a specific topic. Is that is your
Yeah,
question?
that helps. Thank you.
And then similar to number one, but on a fire department level, and Lynn and I have kind of been working on this a little bit already with Chief Schrimbo and then the president of the Carver Fire Relief Association, Luke Schwartz. I'm just looking at our peer cities as it relates to training and on-call pay, but also the retirement benefit or their pension relief benefit. And so we're in the process of engaging Abdul and doing a pension study based on kind of a low, medium, and high range of kind of bringing ourselves back into the market for what our peer cities are providing for benefits to their fire department. So that's kind of the action plan. We've attached the detailed results of the survey as well as a summary. I think in general, there's a lot of great things here. I think I'm also excited that we've also established a baseline, so now we can go back and say, okay, how are we doing? I am kind of interested in getting some feedback from the council on how often do you want this to be an annual survey? Is it every 2 years? Just to try to get a sense. I think we've been kind of talking about it as an annual, but I just wanted to kind of check in before we started communicating that back to the team.
Can we talk a little bit about the review itself, and then we can decide maybe whether we want to go with 1 or 2 quarterings? That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm talking now, but I don't want to jump in front of anyone.
No, go ahead. Go.
So when I looked at this, obviously the highs and the lows are what stands out. Not that everything in between is important too. I want to first of all say that we have a 100% on my supervisor is respectful to me, and I think that getting a 100% on something like that is really it's really great. I have one question before we go any farther though. When it said that we had 17 of 18 full-time employees, are you the 18th that didn't do it, or was there one that chose not to?
One that chose not to participate.
Okay.
And it's not the one who was out on leave during that time period?
No, Aaron submitted.
Oh, okay.
Okay. A couple of them I wanted to just talk a little bit about was, we're looking at some of the lows. I see that you have in the proposed action plan, we're looking at that, I received timely information on issues and topics that impact my role. And that was a pretty low scoring one. So and to me the undecided, to me that falls, and just when I'm looking at it, a little bit less than being on the agree or disagree, right? You're falling a little bit more onto the disagree side. So I'm glad to see that was something that was noticed and that is put into action here. One that I was looking at is the number 4 when it says I'm empowered to make decisions and feel comfortable contributing ideas and opinions. So that one was a little bit lower, and I'm not sure that I saw in the action plan anything that might address this. When I sort of roll this around in my head, what I don't want to have here for our staff is kind of like the authoritarian rule where, it's my way or the highway, just do it because I told you so. And I'm not saying that that's the culture, but when I read this, that we have somewhere we're not quite comfortable with, getting our own ideas and opinions out there. Have you thought of any ways that we can maybe address that?
To be frank, no. I mean, we talked about this quite a bit on the leadership team. I think our count was like one person accounts for 6%, and so in essence, we have 4 people that are struggling with that, and so I think it's something to be aware of and to promote information sharing, to promote feedback without consequences. But I can't think of an action other than a mindset and a philosophy that gets you there.
Okay. And, to say that, well, it's only 4 people, well, I mean, the percentages are still the same, right? I mean, it's still roughly 25% of our staff that is kind of feeling this way. So, let's stay cognizant of that, whether we put it in a specific action plan, and maybe something will come to you after we're talking about this tonight, and there'll be some light bulb aha moment.
And I just want to clarify, I don't mean only their thoughts still.
Oh, no, I
represent.
know. Yeah.
I just mean that, because we talked about this quite a bit, I don't want to, if you look at number 3 of opportunities for training and professional development, I don't want to think, well, we got that at 88% or 90%, we don't have to do anything with that. I think because of the size of our group, I think this is just an enlightenment kind of and then you kind of adjust. So I don't want to say we don't have to work on anything that we're 85% or below, and then we have to anything below 70, we have to say, oh, this is all correct here. Because I think ultimately there are things that we can do better, and I would say ultimately there are dynamics of the position where there are situations where there's going to be some disagreement on philosophy and how to approach things, and I think that's natural and should be encouraged. So I'm trying not to get too up or down, and I think that I know the team kind of matches that sentiment. So I think it's a point well taken. We want to encourage and find out why that is, and are there situations that is leading to someone choosing not to contribute ideas. But I mean, I would say ultimately that's kind of my biggest concern, or my only concern with this whole survey is, as a team, I try to lead, and I know that our team does, we don't operate in anonymity. If I have a problem with the mayor, I want to say Mayor, I really struggle with how you approached me on that, and is there something else going on? And so, without knowing who's concerned, I don't really know how to solve the problem. It's well, is Councilmember McLean concerned, or is it Brenda Good, or is it? And I can't kind of go up to that person, and they're not sharing it, so it's
right,
a little bit of an embedded what to do with it, because some people obviously feel really good about it, and some people don't.
Right, but then that too, then if you are in a situation with the staff where you can kind of, body language will tell you some things too, and you can see that this is maybe happening, and then maybe it's not you. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean it's your meeting. It could be Chad's meeting. It could be anyone who's in the supervisory role. So I think that just, like I said, that one stands out to me, that I think that our folks should feel comfortable and empowered to make those decisions and do that. So I think that's across the board for everybody. When it comes to the compensation, I expected this, right? I expected to say that our compensation is low. We're still a small city, and I think sometimes we take a little bit of brunt because we are on the edge of the bigger cities who can pay more. There's different reasons that I think we would come here. I'm never making excuses for what someone's opinion is on their role. Bless you. But I do think that there are some ways that we can, but looking at our benefits package, but there's some things that we're not going to be able to match Edina. We're not going to be able to match Minneapolis, no matter how far we go. I was here when we did the last compensation study. I think that it is very valid looking at it, at least in my opinion. We're going to be 10 years out from the last one very quickly here, and I think that that's a very decent marker to take another look at it and see where we're at for that. There was one other one. Oh, and then I was a little bit disheartened to see when it, now again, it's a small percentage, but said I would recommend a friend that apply for an open position. So the undecided and strongly disagree or disagree was on there. I think that hopefully some of these action plan items will hopefully change that around. Because I think we have a good group here, so I'd like to see that not, be a little bit higher. So I think that some of these things you put in place will help that out. That's all I have.
I think it's great just the amount of participation. And there's already some action items kind of addressing the one that probably had the, largest amount of the strongly disagree.
I know it was backwards.
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, I had read ahead, so my mind already wanted me to talk about the fire department one, but so I'm just trying to keep them separate. As far as looking at the total compensation, important, but I have a hard time if it is cost, how much does it cost to do that? Because that money comes from somewhere, so. But maybe that's changed over the years, maybe that's information's a little more readily available, or it's easier to.
Well, and I would
compare.
say, we kind of had a little bit of this with the fire department. We met with them last week, and Lynn did some research on relief benefits and hourly pay. And hourly pay, I would say we're above average as it relates to peer cities. I think an interesting dynamic as it relates to Carver's fire department is that there's a number of firefighters that work for both Carver's fire department and Chaska's fire department. Well, Chaska's not a peer city as far as our peer city review goes, but the real life comparison exists regardless in that Chaska pays X for their relief per year, and Y for their hourly pay, and I make this in Carver, and so I think part of it is just I don't know if we've ever done the type of research that Lynn did to show well, this is how we stack up with the communities with our same characteristics. So it's like with anything, if it's expensive or affordable, what are you comparing it to? What is expensive for you? And so I think the key terms in this for both 14 and 14 are competitive. It's not. It's competitive based on our peer cities. The standard isn't competitive with Chaska, Chan, and Eaton Prairie.
Right.
Because the analogy that I like to use is if we were making the same as the folks in Chaska, Chan, and Eden Prairie, they'd be asking their city councils for raises because they'd say, well, Carver of 6,000 is making the same amount as we are, and we're
5 times.
we're 70,000.
Right.
So it kind of perpetuates. I think we have a really good team. We want to do everything that we can to keep them, but I think Councilmember Sear brings up a good point in that it has to come from somewhere. You have to have that balance. And hopefully we have a bunch of other kind of, I would say, work-life balance benefits that maybe some other cities don't enjoy. And now we have this new engagement team that's probably going to come up with some awesome events.
Forced work fun.
Yeah.
I just want to comment that, employee engagement is a really important part of retention, right? And I applaud this whole staff for really going through what I would consider the best practice. So not only did you do a survey and try to get as much participation in the survey, but you didn't take the results at face value. You had the discussions with staff as well, right? Because these are just questions on a page. There's a lot of nuance that goes around it, right? And having those interactive discussions to make sure that the leadership understands what the responses mean and has a conversation about action plan as well. Is this the right thing that's gonna move the needle? So I applaud that. Also having an action plan means that you can measure it, report on it, right? And demonstrate that you're doing it. That's another key piece, right? Because employees don't want to just fill out a survey and then that's the last we hear of that. So they want to see a plan and they want to see the results of it. So I think what you've identified here really hits what I would call the 80s of the concerns, I think, of employees. And I would encourage staff to do something on an annual basis is probably a best practice, so that you take these steps, you measure, and then see what else needs to be done.
Before we move on, I'm gonna put Lynn and Chad on the spot, just because the council's just hearing my voice on it. Would you just mind sharing some observations you had after facilitating conversations with your teams on, feedback that you heard and just kind of the conversation you're hearing from the council tonight?
Sure, I can go first. Kind of, Christy, going to what you were saying, one thing that I realized is that being comfortable with, I would do like a monthly staff, I just have 2 staff, but a monthly meeting, and I realized that they don't feel comfortable sharing things in that meeting. They want to be separate. And so I shared that with the larger group, and with Chad, it might be the same thing. He has some younger staff who maybe they're not comfortable talking in front of the seasoned people who have been there for a while and don't feel like their, ideas are gonna matter, or maybe they'll get made fun of. I don't know, So maybe just pulling them 15 minutes, I said, just 15 minutes once a month or every 3 weeks, and just saying, hey, do you, how's it going, or do you have anything to throw in? So that was something that I've been trying to do more of, is just individually meeting with people and asking them. So that was super valuable to me.
Same thing Lynn said. I do quarterly, just kind of one-on-one check-in, pop-up check-ins, and it's basically like a true or false, like, are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with this? And that kind of shows me the strengths and weaknesses that we need to train in some of the new staff, because I think we have 5 new people in public services. So it's just kind of that one-on-one, and same thing, spot on. It's a quiet group, and I usually hear it from somebody else before I hear it from that person. So that kind of opens the door for them to, communicate with me one-on-one.
So Chad, when you say that you talk with them and you ask maybe if it's about training and things like that, do you get into a little more nitty-gritty with them besides just, like, are you comfortable using this piece of equipment? Are you comfortable with this? Like, what would be a conversation you'd be having that might get a little bit, I guess, deeper into what might be happening?
Well, for the new guys that don't understand what a locate is, like all the underground utilities, I wouldn't feel comfortable having them install a sign if they don't understand what the paint on the ground means. So I'll take one of the newer people and set them up with one of the more seasoned people, and then have them go install signs and be able to understand, like, this is why we need to field shift this over 2 feet or move it down because somebody's water service is right here. So it just, and have them work with multiple different people so they get kind of their own personal flavor of, learning from each of the more veteran individuals.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from yours is that it's more task-oriented, that we're getting to kind of a task-oriented, and that we certainly don't want to open up that every time you meet with them is like the B session, right? Like, we're just gonna whine and complain about everything. But I'm wondering if there can be a piece, and maybe Brent, that's something you can, there's a piece that gets added to get maybe a little more, like, the culture of it, is everything's going well in the culture of your stations up there, rather than just being solely task-oriented.
It starts out more task-oriented, but then, it could go anywhere after that.
Okay, as long as there's a way that they feel open that during that time, that even if you're starting with tasks, that they feel that that's an open time that they can talk to you about something beyond the task.
Yep, I always offer that up. Just kind of open-ended question, what else do you want to know, what else, how are you feeling, a little bit of everything.
Okay, so then maybe there's an opportunity to have like a coin sentence there that really says, here's what I'm looking for. Like, maybe I'm, where are we at with this part of the culture, or this part of whatever that might be, so that they know that we want to hear that too, not just, because it can be nerve-wracking, right, to talk to your boss about stuff unless you know that they're open to having that conversation with you. So,
I think for me, looking at this, I'm a little conflicted with the survey because you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but I want to have more of an open door policy and you have an issue, send me an email, call my cell phone, knock on my door, rather than airing grievances anonymously on a community, on a survey. It doesn't align with the kind of culture that I know Brent strives to have and everybody strives to have here. I understand that perhaps that's somewhat folks' more sweet spot, but I always go back to the day I used to work for Fortune 4 company, and I would always do these employee surveys on my worst days. So they got really, really low scores. So I think like who had a really crummy day when they did this, and maybe they don't think that the city of Carver is that awful of a place, but they had some stuff that day and they had a day or whatever. That same company really focused on net promoter score, which if you aren't familiar with it, it's taking the percentage of detractors, so it would be the folks who strongly disagree or disagree with these questions, and subtracting detractors from promoters, which promoters are undecided or strongly agree or agree. And if you look at the results of this survey from a net promoter score response, we did really, 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 really well. Even on the questions where we ranked the lowest, and a quarter of the folks said that we didn't give them timely information on the issues and topics that impact their roles. That's still a 50% net promoter score. Doing math on the fly, please don't double check it. You know, it's
trust me.
it's still really good. You know, this certainly gives us something to measure. I don't think we have, you know, this is why we have the city manager form of government. I don't want to get into micromanaging you too much and talking about what kind of conversation you should or shouldn't have with your employees. That's not my style. And I think that this is good. I think clearly the desire is to have it annually. I don't have any issues with that, so we can see where we're going. But if we have 5 new folks in public services next year at this time, hopefully we won't, but we can have different answers, and that doesn't account for this. And you know, like, I don't know, it is what it is.
I guess my only comment is that there are still people who do not feel comfortable, even with an open door policy, in giving their feedback. And so there is value in having a data point that is anonymous. What I like that this team has done is they've not just taken the anonymous data, but had a conversation about it with everybody, right? So that really sussed out the essence of the results of the survey. And thank you for saying that these results are very good. It is very positive, because they are, in general. Sure, there are some things we can do better. Everybody can always do better. But, and from an employee perspective, I like that if we promote a regular cycle of this, means that we don't just do one and done. We're done caring. We're done painting, right? But that box checked, moved on, right? But that it's a continuous discussion, and I think that the anonymous survey provides the basis of the discussion. It's not the whole discussion or the action plan, but it's a basis.
I have a few things.
Go ahead. Can I just make one more comment?
Yep.
The only other thing, I like that you had a proposed action plan. I think that's great. I think it's great. I also worry about putting too much on folks' plates and having that end up shooting us in the foot for employee satisfaction. You know, internal communication system. Of course, you can anticipate that I put a little post-it note on there saying, when are we going to hire the communications person to help with that? Because as you know, above anyone else, like that can potentially be a full-time job for the city, and we're kind of getting close to crossing that threshold. I just want to make sure that I think this is great, but I see it as a balance of too much on one person's plate and lowering the morale, the work-life balance, the job satisfaction.
So I'm going to jump ahead of you. So I wanted to say something. So Courtney, when you were talking about with micromanaging how the questions were asking, that's not my point. My point is that if we've got one manager who is trying to in-tune, but we have another manager who's not, I'm not going to call up manager A, B, and C and say, what are these questions that you've been asking all year? Are you doing this quarterly? That's not it.
Good.
What I would like though is to, if we're going to use this, that we have some kind of a similarity between how we're approaching it, so that we're getting the same feedback, so that we're approaching it a little bit the same way. And I also don't think, this survey that came through, yes, is remarkably good. I don't think throwing out the disagrees and just putting like the rose-colored glasses on to say it was only this many, I don't think that does us the good that we wanted from this survey to start with. Now you're always going to get some people who are disgruntled or had the bad day and did their survey, and that happens, right? So I mean, if you see that there's someone that disagree, I think that's what we were aiming for. I do like the action plan that was set in place. I agree that I don't want it to become overwhelming for someone, and mainly that would probably be Brent, right, who's going to be on the top of managing this. So I think we can do what we can do, but I think that it's important that Brent then, if he's feeling like we're putting too many things on this action plan for him, also to tell us that the same way.
But just kind of two pieces,
Yeah.
so one, we're starting to do it kind of happened by, I would say, accident as far as how it relates to the survey, but the work to create this support services manager position that Brenda's taken on is, I would say, really a shining example of kind of what we're striving for. So, Brenda Good is meeting one-on-one with her team members as kind of their own team. And so you can see kind of the conversations that we've had where it might be difficult for a new employee to talk to the public services director, where Brenda Good might feel like more of a peer in this administration setting. And so every other week we meet as all the department heads and Brenda Good, and we have a conversation about what Brenda Good is seeing, where we might have gaps, what she's hearing from that team, and so we're having those conversations. I'd also say that to Council Member Mock's good point about like how we're communicating, we weave how we want to communicate into our department head meetings by going over trainings, readings, videos, and talking about maybe times where we haven't met our own expectations for delivering messaging. And so I would say we want to be in this constant state of learning and growing, and whenever any one of us reaches this point where we have it all figured out, that's a sure sign that we don't have it figured out. So all good feedback from the council. Just wanted to kind of check in to make sure that you're okay, because some of this involves you at some point, when we start to involve kind of budgetary things. But I would say the lion's share of this has to do with this kind of prioritizing items. So.
And that was the other thing, I'm all in favor of the compensation study. It sounds like we are due.
Yep.
And I think, the fire department had some more feedback on wages, compensation, all that kind of stuff. You're going down that path, but let's have them make the case for that. I don't think we've ever said no to anything that the fire department's asked for, from a new truck to SCBA gear, let's hear what they want. There were some items in the questions about roof leaks and floor maintenance stuff. I want to make sure that we're taking care of that and that that's not an issue, because that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Let's not have another leaky roof.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Chad jump in, but my assessment of that is that Chad knows about it, Chief Trimble knows about it, and you have 35 firefighters. Does does Joe the firefighter know that Chief Trimble and Chad are working on a plan for the leaky roof? Has that been communicated? I'm not sure. And so Chad, you want to speak to some of the maintenance items just for some closure?
Sure, on that particular event, I think it was a large rain event, rain coming down sideways, and there was one piece that was repaired, but through the work order system, somebody made a request that they noticed this because it was in the evening. And we had our roof people out there the next day, and we are planning on, budgeting in the 5-year plan for new roof. Also, we do a monthly inspection on all city buildings.
Okay.
And then we do an annual, like, deep dive inspection where we look at everything, so.
Okay, thank you. Context matters, right? And a leaky roof, my mind's eye sees like buckets, right, in the fire base to be there for every time it rains. It doesn't see a scenario where it was a 1 or 2 time thing,
Right.
and then it was fixed very quickly thereafter, so thank you, that helps.
For the fire department comments, I'm glad to see these responses, knowing that they're going to be generally negative if people are going to write them. They're not gonna tell us how in love with it they are, but, so you have to kind of take it for what it is, that some of these are gonna be negative. I am seeing, as everyone else does, a lot of the talk about pay, underfunded, that kind of undertone there. So I'm wondering if, and Brent, you talked about already too, about the peer cities, that maybe we should work with Cali, and maybe there needs to be a little bit more communication on what percentage of our budget actually does go to the fire department. What our peer cities do look like, because this may be, some of these responses may be because there's a lack of understanding of what actually is funded. You can see all the things that you want that you can't get, but sometimes you don't realize all the things that you got,
Like
right?
sit through a budget presentation and then see.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, but we're talking about, the fire department as a whole. This could be any number of them, this isn't all officers who we think would be more in the know of this. So maybe that's something where there just needs to be, from Cali, at one of his meetings, a little bit more information on what percentage of our budget actually does go to the fire and some of those other things that I mentioned. And then, not that it fixes this, that it changes how much we are paying at this moment or whatever it is, but at least there might be some more understanding of the background of the information. I was kind of heartwarmed to see a lot of these who said I didn't join this for the money anyways. I joined it for community, but I still care about money, because
But how many times have we seen the word family used in that? And I get it, that's a very common correlation. I said it a little tongue in cheek, but maybe that's a good communication strategy, right? To let, as we're trying to talk about our budget and let folks know what goes into it and how it's done, we could do a 15-minute budget presentation for the fire department as part of their training. 80% of those folks are taxpayers in the city of Carver, so that would be just a good way of letting folks know how that's done in a more abbreviated, they're focused on the fire department kind of way. Our chief communications officer trying to put something together for us.
We actually we've done that in previous sittings. We haven't done it probably in the last year or 2, but we've kind of gone through that. We can, again, I do think it's an interesting dynamic, not kind of a pro or con, just interesting in that there is something different about the fire department where, we wouldn't necessarily have that conversation with public services and do a compare and contrast. And so like there's an element of like, I would just call it like it, I see it as a little bit of politics. It's like we almost need to convince them that we think they're getting a fair deal. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do the communications, but I just want to kind of recognize that in some ways we're treating the fire department differently than we would the rest of our team in that regard. That's not a pro or con. I'm just, there is a different subtlety that we all deal with the fire department, because it is kind of, they are part-time employees, but they're not traditional part-time employees, so. But yet, to your long story short, we can and will continue to do.
That's a really good point. Let me noodle on that a little bit more, because I like the idea of,
I still think
your
it's
point of
important.
not separating it out.
See, I think it's important though for this fact. We'll just, Chad's guys and or girls, come in, this is their full-time job. Whoever might be in the fire department may come in for training, but then they're here at 3 a.m. for a fire call, and then that's all they're here. So they don't have the same amount of information that just naturally flows through because it's not a full-time job and they're not here on a daily basis. So I don't feel that it is, or see it as being we're treating them differently, but we're getting to them in a different way because they're not here full-time. They may only be here for their training and then on a call here and a call there, and then they're out in and out. So they're not gonna have that same information flow that you're gonna have as a full-time employee.
There's some low-hanging fruit that we can do from a communications perspective too, of, email everybody the Carver Connections newsletter, like, do you read the Carver Connections newsletter? Every word.
Yeah.
Do you read it?
Yeah, Brenda Good sends it out.
Oh, okay. Does it go to the fire department?
It's a new change, but yes, it is.
Oh, okay, good, okay, well, look at you already on top of it.
Okay.
See, I told you it was a good idea.
That's right, I just asked you if the mayor said it.
I asked you to. That does work towards that internal communication, right?
And we've started mailing, the city council roundup to the entire team and the
Okay.
commission, so we're doing those pieces. And part of it is like, we're not gonna be able to solve in 3 or 4 steps, it's gonna be identifying opportunities. Like,
Yeah.
you just kinda had like, oh, we could do that, or we could do that, so hopefully we can do, a lot of like high impact, low labor kind of initiatives, because there is, like, we have, I think, a really good communication basis, but we don't have a lot of resources to dedicate to that, and so it's like, you hate to pump out another email newsletter separate, so you like to use, like, can we use this council update, can we use the connections, can we just get that to more people rather than
Yeah.
creating another document with another deadline with
There's work
different
involved
content.
in
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
But I think you're all right on point with how we can do that, so.
Right, any other comments, questions? Right, did you get what you needed from us?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more that we were talking about. Are we set on annually or every other year? I mean, what do we think?
I was thinking of the fire department, maybe 6 months. I just feel like there's a lot of things might, as they start implementing some of these things, there might be more positive responses. But I also can't keep track of how many people are new.
And I think we should do it more often than once a year.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so either for me. I'd rather this change takes a little bit of time too, and I think we might be a little bit too early on it, so.
We always, we do our strategic planning sessions every other year, right?
Are we
do
doing
we
it
wanna
at the
kind of-
right time of year?
What do we want to kind of keep with that cadence?
But just to be frank, like, I'd like you to consider 2 years, because if we do it at the same time, we're really, we have about like the 9 months to like inspire that change, and it just feels like, frankly, a little claustrophobic to like,
Yeah.
we gotta try to get all this change done, and then we're gonna measure it 9 months from now. It doesn't feel to be like a big runway to like do better.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I was
Thank
actually
you,
thinking every
thank you
other
for
year.
speaking up. I think that would be good, every 2 years.
Thank you.
I just care that we plan for it so
Yep.
that people know it's not a tick the box once,
Yeah.
moving on.
Well, and I appreciate, because I think your feedback will be helpful to communicate to the team, like, council's behind this.
Yeah.
We're gonna do it every 2 years, this is our action plan, and then it'll be important that we hit 1 or 2 of these pretty quickly to let them know that we're serious about follow through here. And then to report,
Right.
like,
And say,
hey,
here's
we've
what we
done
did.
this, right?
Yeah.
So. I do have a couple of updates if I can
Go ahead.
hammer those out.
Yep.
Received news from Commander Mike Woleen that Deputy Sandberg's going to be transferred to investigations after Steamboat Days, so we'll be getting a new deputy in September, right after the festival, so making arrangements for his introduction to the council, so kind of bittersweet. Sad to see Deputy Sandberg go, but very happy for her new opportunity in investigations.
Do we know if we're getting a brand new deputy or someone who's experienced just from another area?
Experience from another area.
Is this something where they could spend a few hours at Steamboat Days too? Or we can't really?
I will check into that.
I just thought if we're gonna hand it off right after, that maybe they could get a flavor for what it
Oh,
looks
I
like.
think Katie spends some time with them too. It's not a, that's the squad over there and Carver's in that
But
direction.
Steamboat Days isn't coming for a year, so I thought it was something where they were gonna, you know, cause I think they put out to pick up some hours or shit.
Yeah.
Maybe
Get a Steamboat Days under your belt, just so you know about it for next year.
Initiation process.
Yeah.
Come in for 4 hours, see what it is, then get out.
Then do so on feet.
You're in charge of this for next year.
Yeah, all of it.
The Public Services Department, I noticed just installed the digital speed sign on Spring Creek Drive, so that's
Ooh.
up, so check that out. We're anticipating a August Planning Commission review of a Mizzy's Pizza in Carver Square, so pizza restaurant, so they'll be at the August Planning Commission, and then the September 6th City Council meeting. And then just wanted to let you know the city attorney's office are in the process of they've hired a consultant to serve 216 Carver Creek Place. So I know the council had mentioned they wanted to make sure that the property owner, you know, had verification, and so we've asked for verification once those papers are served, so that you can feel confident that that communication is in the hands of the property owners. So
Great.
that's all I have.
I have just a couple of council requests. I'm wondering if we can get an update on where things are with trunk fees and the Third Street Bridge. Feels like it's been a bit since we heard about those.
So you gave me a nice heads up, so I have that sitting in my inbox, so I
Oh.
can send that out to the council.
Perfect, okay. We can go on top of things. Any other requests?
I think you should do your, I'm glad I gave you that idea.
Okay. You know what, the 10 minutes between meetings, I'll just stand up. Let's see, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
A motion by Councilmember McKnight
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Sarah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.